This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
So what was the best address in Dublin in the 18th century? We'll be talking to Melanie Hayes about her book, The Best Address in Town, Henrietta Street, Dublin, and its first residents, 1720 to 1780.
And one of Ireland's best-loved contemporary poets, Moya will be in to talk about and read from her collected poems from her 6 principal collections, and it covers over 3 decades of impressive poetry. Looking forward to that. So, the coffee's made.
The toast is on.
And the books are on the table.
Dublin is well known for its Georgian squares, the elaborate doors and fanlights, the ornate plasterwork of the interiors, the wide streets where the well-heeled could parade. Merrion Square we think of, or Fitzwilliam Square, the Georgian Mile of Fitzwilliam Street, or Mount Joyce Square. But what was the best address of all? What was the most exclusive street where the seriously endowed and important lived, where peer rubbed shoulder with peer, where the richest property developers consorted with bishops and social climbers? What was the elitist street of them all? And it turns out that it was Henrietta Street in the north of the city. And here to tell us about its heyday is Dr. Melanie Hayes, Research Fellow in the Department of History and Art and Architecture at Trinity College Dublin, and author of The Best Address in Town, Henrietta Street, Dublin, and its first residents, 1720 to 1780. So, Melanie, you're very welcome to Books for Breakfast. And, you know, just before we turn to the actual book itself, I mean, just that bit, 1720 to 1780, it's a long time ago. I'm just wondering, what kind of place was Dublin in this period?
Early Georgian Dublin, so 18th century Dublin, was a really cosmopolitan place. Dublin was actually the second city of the British Empire, if we can call it that, at that time. And particularly the early decades of the century were a time of relative peace and prosperity. So Dublin's capital, or the country's capital, really saw a lot of physical changes at that time. You've mentioned the wide streets. So if you think about the city, it would have had a lot of winding medieval alleys, and these got replaced by these wide and convenient streets. Imposing sort of cut stone buildings were erected, monuments of the power and the political might of the Protestant ascendancy. They were the rulers at the time. And then these row after row of lofty red brick terraces, as you mentioned, that surround Merrion Square, St. Stephen's Green. And these sprung up to house the upper class, the landed gentry who flocked to the city in parliamentary season. So it was a really prosperous, say, really vibrant, cosmopolitan city, but it was also a city of two faces. And while this sort of upper class minority lived in really great luxury, poverty was really rife among the majority of its citizens. So,
as you say, yeah, a city of kind of two cultures, and very much an ascendancy city, and a city of a kind of Protestant aristocracy, and then everybody else. But I'm interested as well. I mean, very often when we think of Georgian Dublin, we kind of orientate ourselves to the south side. We think of Merrion Square and Fitzwilliam Square and all of that, and we sometimes forget about the north side, don't we? I mean, we tend to forget about Capel Street and Mount Joyce Square and Henrietta Street. But they were where it all began, isn't that right?
Absolutely. Certainly in the first half of the 18th century, the north side, well, it had yet to be overshadowed by the south as a real hub of fashion and elite residences. So as you say, Capel Street would have been traditionally where the Protestant ascendancy would have had their townhouses in the 17th century. Jervis Street as well. And then Henrietta Street, as they developed from the 1720s, was really in the heart of this upper class city. So there was a bowling green at Marlborough Street. There were pleasure gardens at the Rotunda Hospital, or the Lying-in Hospital. And also what's really important, Capel Street and all of these environs were within easy reach of the ceremonial heart of the city of Dublin Castle and the Parliament at College Green.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I was going to say, because, I mean, you say in your introduction that there were two kind of major building projects going on, one in the public sphere and one in the private. I mean, the public one was Edward Lovett Pierce's Parliament House that you mentioned there in College Green. and the private one was Luke Gardner's development at Henrietta Street. I mean, we've often heard of Luke Gardner, and of course there's Gardner Street named after him. But who was Luke Gardner, and what was his big idea?
Luke Gardner, is something of an enigma. We don't really know very much about his origins. He seems to have really done his best to keep them quite obscure. Similarly with his financial dealings, he was a self-made man who married well and developed some really important connections within politics, within the government. And he was also, as well as being a property developer, he was also a private banker. So he was a politician. So he had his fingers in many pies. And while at the same time as he was developing Henrietta Street, he was also busy working his way up through the ranks of government. He became the deputy vice treasurer, so a really influential figure. As I say, as a property developer, we probably know him best. His family name's immortalised in streets like Gardner Street, that was actually named after his grandson, also Luke Gardner, Mountjoy Square, Blessington Street. So he really made a huge impact on the face of the North Georgian city. But what's really important with Henrietta Street was Gardner wasn't just the developer, he was one of the earliest residents. So he was playing two different games here. As well as developing this exclusive residential street, he was also attracting quality buyers from the highest ranks of Ireland's governing class who would become his very influential neighbours.
Indeed. And I mean, I suppose that the heart of the book is the stories of the residents of the street. And it's kind of like a who's who of sort of posh Ireland or posh Dublin. I mean, it's kind of bishops and the Right Honourable this and the Right Honourable that. And it's very much the kind of, I suppose, the elite ruling classes. I mean, what kind of people were these, who lived on the street?
Well, as I say, they were the upper echelons of elite society, really rich, really powerful, and most importantly for them, at least, they were Protestant. So there was this Protestant ascendancy. The first and probably most influential resident was a man called Hugh Boulter. He was the Archbishop of Armagh, the Primate of all Ireland, so the head of the Anglican Church. And he was hugely influential, both within the church, but also within politics. He was an Englishman, came over to Ireland in 1724 and immediately commissioned the largest house on Henrietta Street, which is now lost. But because he was such an important figure, he attracted other high-ranking residents from church, military and state. In the first 30 years, Henrietta Street was home to no less than 6 titled residents. So lords, ladies, 2 army generals, 3 archbishops, 2 speakers of the Irish House of Commons, and the Lord Chancellor, so kind of the head of the legal system in Ireland. So really, really important movers and shakers. And the street just became a very important then political hub in the first half of the 18th century.
And I'm interested in that as well, because it became the site of a kind of conflict as well. I mean, there's a now sort of totally forgotten conflict that was important at the time, and it involved some of the residents of Henrietta Street, and even involved the complete destruction of Smock Alley Theatre. What was that all about?
Yes, absolutely. Well, there were certainly a lot of bitter rivalries on the street, and probably one of the most politically charged disputes was the so-called money bill crisis or money bill dispute from the 1750s. This was essentially a row between members of the Irish Parliament and the British administration in Dublin Castle. And it was a row over money, over the remittance of surplus Irish revenues to the Crown in Britain. The so-called patriot politicians naturally wanted to keep Irish revenue or Irish money in Ireland. And they came up with quite novel ways of spending this money to avoid giving it over to the Crown. Lots of public building projects, such as building the new West Front at Trinity College. So they were siphoning off the money, but essentially it was a standoff. They said, no, we're not giving you back the money. And the government were insisting upon it. But this political row spilled over into the streets and the theatres, as you say. But a lot of the action was concentrated around Henrietta Street. The key members of these rival factions lived here. We had John Ponsonby and Archbishop George Stone. He was a really voracious individual, and they were on the castle side or the crown side. And then we had the Patriots, a man called Henry Boyle. He was the Speaker of the Irish House of Commons, and his ally Thomas Carter. And so there were a number of really charged gatherings on the street, dinners, after hours drinking sessions that ended in public debate, public censor, and a lot of abuse of these individuals in the press. So, say, really, really politically charged.
Doesn't sound a million miles away from contemporary Dublin in some respects, kind of warring developers and fights and bribes and whatever else was happening. And I what you say there about the drinking, and I was interested to see as well, because obviously you have all these kind of nobles and highfalutin members of the ascendancy, but they weren't all kind of prim and proper, were they? I mean, there were connections, for instance, to the notorious Hellfire Club too, weren't there? I mean, I was interested to see about Richard St. George, for instance. Can you tell us something about him?
Yeah, General Richard St. George is a very interesting character. For me, actually, he was one of the more surprising characters that emerged in my research. He was a highly decorated army officer. He was a politician, landowner from Kilrush and County Kilkenny. And he was also one of the more senior residents on the street. He was 70 when he bought number 8 Henrietta Street in the 1740s. But behind this more dignified public face, we start to get hints of a more sort of dissolute side of his character or his private affairs. As you say, he was reputedly a member of the notorious Hellfire Club, and illegal Hellfire Club. I think it's important to bear in mind. They famously held their meetings at a hunting lodge on Montpelier Hill, the Hellfire Club as we call it now. But they also met in the Eagle Tavern on Fishamble Street and Lucas's Coffee House on Cork Hill in Dublin. But it's really surprising that a man of General St. George's rank and his age was a member of this really notorious society. Like, they scandalised even the scandalous Georgians. Rumours of devil worship, riotous behaviour, even sacrifice. And one member of the society was tried for drinking to the health of the devil and openly abjuring God. So, really quite shocking.
Great stuff. You can't beat it. I mean, it sounds a lot of fun in its kind of dark way. But I was wondering, like just to go back to the actual, the houses and everything, because it's a seat of power. It's enormously influential people and all that. But what kind of houses were these? I mean, what's in the sense of what's so special about, say, the buildings on Henrietta Street as compared to elsewhere in Dublin at the time? What made them what made them stand out or so special?
As you say, Peter, there were, of course, other examples of high-class building in Dublin in the early 18th century. Really large mansion houses around Ainger Street in the south side, Oxman's Town, Capel Street. But at Henrietta Street, it was the overall scale of ambition that was novel. The concentration on this quite small street of really palatial-sized or scaled houses. And they also brought new architectural models, elegance in design that had emerged very recently in London, in Westminster, houses around Mayfair. Neat red brick fronts, regular parapet roof lines, so the sort of squared roof lines above, which would have been quite different to the sort of gabled Dutch billies that might have been used to in Dublin of the late 17th century. Really elaborate hand-carved stone door cases, sash windows. So really very elegant, very correct, classical proportions. And then, of course, behind these red brick facades, the houses had stunning, really richly decorated and finely furnished interiors.
And these would all have been local craftsmen, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. One of the real shames about my research was that we couldn't find out more about the craftsmen who actually built these houses. We know about some of the architects who were involved, and we can speculate about the names of the craftsmen, but they were really, really fine examples of native Irish craftsmanship. And also the street itself was really pioneering in its spacious layout, 50 feet wide between the iron railings in front of the houses. So that would have been quite a contrast, as I say, to the kind of winding medieval streets of the old city. A good road and granite paving was laid out in the 1720s. And again, that would have been quite novel for its time.
But of course, things changed, didn't they, as time went on, didn't they? I mean, the Act of Union in 1800 had a big effect on, I suppose, not just this street, but the whole of Dublin. Isn't that right?
Yes, the Act of Union was certainly a turning point for this street. It was a major trigger of change throughout the city. Of course, the abolishment of the Irish Parliament, its move to Westminster, meant that Dublin's governing class no longer needed their city residences. So they sold or sublet their townhouses largely to the sort of emerging professional classes, lawyers, doctors. But it is important, I think, to note that this change didn't happen overnight. It's more of a slow trickle than a flood that had been expected. And even before the union, there were indications that Henrietta Street was beginning to lose its exclusive cachet. This may have been due to the growing popularity of the south side of the city, developments around Merrion Square, also around Mountjoy Square in the east of the city. So there was a notable shift in tone in the late 18th century and early 19th century.
And when did we start to see the first tenements appearing on the street?
Really towards the end of the 19th century. So beginning of the 19th century, 1800, 1850, you see a lot of lawyers moving in, prerogative courts, and the encumbered estates court at 14 Henrietta Street. And then in 1876, a man called Thomas Vance, so-called slum landlord, purchased number 14 Henrietta Street, and he installed 19 tenements, flats, 1, 3 and 4 rooms. And actually there's an Irish Times advert for the time, in 1877, which gives us an idea of what these tenement developments were like. They were actually seen as really good quality at the time. They were said to be let to respectable families. They said that the large house had been recently papered, painted, and filled up with every modern sanitary improvement, gas, WCs on the landing. So, it was, for its time, seen as quite high quality.
A few echoes with contemporary Dublin there as well. I think. I was astonished by some of those numbers. Like by 1911, number 14 had 100 people in it, while over 850 people lived on the street as a whole. I mean, those are huge numbers for such a small street. But I should say, because number 14 is now the museum, of course, isn't it? And I should also say that it's just won a big prize. It secured the Stiletto Prize at this year's European Museum of the Year. So that's a big award for it,
Absolutely.
isn't it?
The only Irish museum to have been even put forward for one of these awards. And an important award for the museum as it recognises social history museums' engagement with community. And I think that's really central to the museum. It's a museum of social history, of social life. I had the privilege of working on the development of the museum as a researcher, and then subsequently with the guides there, who are absolutely brilliant. And they work very hard to allow visitors to experience the building's history from its early Georgian beginnings to its tenement times in the 20th century. It's a really special museum. And I think one of the unique qualities about it is the building itself and its lived histories. That's the primary artifact. If walls could talk. And
you because you get, I mean, the way it's done as well is you get a glimpse of the different periods of the house. I mean, I remember there's a very kind of moving video online of a man who remembered kind of being in one of the tenements there and what the conditions were like.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another very unique and quite potent parts of the museum. It's the oral histories that have been gathered of its former residents and other residents around tenement Dublin. Some of the actual possessions that were once housed at number 14 Henrietta Street are back there in their original context. So really quite evocative, wonderful stories to hear the actual memories of the residents themselves.
These museums will be opening at some stage soon, but it's a place very much worth visiting. And so thank you very much, Melanie, for coming in today. So that was Dr. Melanie Hayes talking about the best address in town, Henrietta Street, Dublin, and its first residents, 1720 to 1780, and it's published by Four Courts Press. Thanks, Melanie.
Keats Lives on the Amtrak. This is a poem which I wrote after a stint in the US, in the University of Villanova. And one day I was travelling to New York on the train, and this lovely man sat down opposite me and gave me a poem. He was one of the attendants on the train, and a great Keats fan with a marvellous conversation. So it's really about just how astonishing poetry is. And I'm not a very good teacher myself. I've spent a lot of time teaching, but it's a kind of an homage to teachers sort of as well who have passed on the poetry, really, I think. So Keats Lives on the Amtrak for Jim and Kathy Murphy. Today, on the clunking, hissing silver train between Philly and New York, the African-American conductor squeezed himself into the dining car seat opposite, genially excused himself, and when I responded, asked why my novel was full of page markers. You've it all broken up. And I said that I was teaching it. He leaned forward, smiled, and said, I'm going to get a T-shirt with Keats Lives on it. This time of year, he gestured towards the window. Trees were blurring into bud. When everything starts coming green again, I always think of him. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us. I told him that it was a Dublin taxi driver who first told me that Keats claimed his only certainties were the holiness of the heart's affections and the truth of imagination. He took a ballpoint from the pocket of his uniform jacket, wrote down the quote, asked where it came from, as I had done 2 decades earlier in the back of a taxi, as hundreds had, since the young, sick apothecary penned it to his friend. That is a bombshell, he said. I'm going to give that to my little girl tonight. Oh, light-winged dryad. The intercom announced, next stop, Trenton. The steel wheels began their long scream. He hauled himself up out of the seat, smiled again, and, drawing a line across his chest with his thumb, said, Keats lives.
Oh, Moya. Brilliant.
I should also have paid tribute to the taxi driver who, I happened just thinking about this time of Evan Boland's anniversary. I'd just come from an Evan Boland reading and went to the pub afterwards, as one used to do, and was getting a taxi home because I missed the bus. And this taxi driver started to ask me where I was coming from, and started talking, introduced me to Wallace Stevens, and gave me that wonderful quote. He was a friend of Liam Miller's of the Dolman Press, actually.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
And it is great. It's true to remember Evan Boland, particularly this time of the year. It's a year since she died. So that was an amazing poem, full of stories. A found poem in many ways, Moya, wasn't it? But I just want to say, what better way to begin this section of our podcast than to have Moya Cannon read her brilliant poem. You just heard it there, Keats Lives on the Amtrak, from her collected poems, just recently published by Carcanet Press. It's a fine book. I've been so much enjoying reading through it over the last few weeks. It's become a great friend to me, Moya. Bring it with me everywhere. Moya Cannon is one of Ireland's most outstanding poets, and it's really a privilege to have her here at the breakfast table this morning. Great to have Moya here. Well, for those of you listening, Moya was born in Dunfanaghy in northwest County Donegal with Irish as her first language. She spent nearly 30 years of her adult life living in Galway City, and she now lives in Shankill, close to the sea in County Dublin, with her husband John. She's been deservedly praised and lauded for her poetry. She's received the Brendan Behan Award. She's received the O'Shaughnessy Award. She was the 2011 Heimbold Professor of Irish Studies at Villanova University. And Peter and myself have known Moya for some years now, But really her poetry preceded our knowing of her, and we've always greatly admired her singular poetry, finely gathered here in this really impressive, beautifully produced collected poems, I have to say, published by Carcanet in Manchester. It's a collected which brings together poems from her 6 main collections: Or 1990, The Parchment Boat 1997, Carrying the Songs 2007, Hands 2011, Keats Lives 2015, and Donegal Tarantella 2019. That's more than 3 decades of wonderful poetry writing. Landscapes, languages, songs, the myriad of rhythms that gather the natural and the human world together, all connect as one huge force at the heart of Moya's poems. The mysteries of archaeology and artefacts discovered, they're ever present too, including the beautiful Vogelherd horse on the cover of this book, celebrated in the poem of its name, Vogelherd horse 30,000 BC. Moya's work also pays deep homage to her really strong interest in the world of music and songs, from which have sprung poems that feel authentic, they feel instinctively natural, they feel alive. Her title poem of the collection, Carrying the Songs, ends with the powerful description of songs which rang out true and bright when flung down upon the deal boards of their days. And speaking of music, and we've just spoken of her as well earlier, the poet Ivan Boland has said of Moya's poems that they lay down not just a landscape and a history, but a music which is all their own, through which the reader can enter a unique dialogue between elegy and celebration. So Moya Cannon, congratulations on your collected. You must be absolutely thrilled to have it out. And I was just wondering, was it very different working on a collected as opposed to a single volume of poetry?
It was completely different, actually. There's very little new. There is some new material in this, but I had originally intended to bring this out about 2 years ago, but I found out quite a bit of new material, so decided to bring out a collection at the time, Donegal Tarantella. So it's a collation. So it's very interesting, just revisiting poems which were, great favourites at one stage and then which you kind of neglected. So it's nice to dust them down again.
Yeah.
And to revisit, you're revisiting your past life and what was central to you and what was really you were passionate about or desperate about at various stages in your life. So it's, as I say in Irish, Golshira Borhin na Swinta. So it's a retrospective as well. It's a very different exercise. I added in a few new poems at the end as well. But very interesting. And of course, the final editing process is very much the same as doing as with any collection, all the proofreading, etc. I was saying something very childish. I didn't expect to have an index. I find that's great fun. Very easy to find a poem. Rather childish kind of thing.
Well, actually, it's a fine size of a book. So I found the index really helpful as well, Moya. And of course, you were helped by John McAuliffe as well, weren't you? He's over there helping you. Which is,
yes. Yeah, John did part of the editing as well. And as did Andrew Latimer, and a great team at Carcanet, actually. We're lovely to work with.
Yeah, well, that's great, Moya. I like that idea of going back into your life and being present there again. It's very nice. I spoke earlier of your love of music and song, and you've said that you considered yourself extraordinarily fortunate in the culture that you encountered as a child growing up in Donegal, where you said poetry was regarded as important. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of this culture of poetry and indeed music and song in your childhood and how it inspired you as you grew up and developed as a poet?
Well, I suppose I got my love of poetry largely from my parents. My mother loved poetry. She had, I came across when she died, I came across a tiny little notebook where she transcribed a lot of the wartime poets, Sigrid Sassoon, etc., Shelley. She'd studied English and French and Irish at Queen's, and she was the first of her family really to get to third level. I think probably almost the first to get to second level, to receive second level education. But her parents were tone deaf apparently, and when they had an evening's entertainment in their little farmhouse in Tyrone, East Tyrone, recitations where they were sort of very important. And I think we can't, even in terms of the whole blossoming of poetry in the north of Ireland in the 60s and 70s, I think we can't underestimate that whole Burns, the interest in Burns, etc., which is very, very strong in the north, and this whole thing, culture of recitation. And then my father had written a bit of poetry in Irish when he was young, under a female nom de plume, and Roisin Nichagüil. And my mother was very friendly with Alice Milligan. She and her brother were living in a village in East Tyrone, and they discovered she was living nearby and went to visit her and became very good friends. So I must confess, between the fact that Alice was such a large presence in my mother's life and the fact that my father used a female nom de plume, I was very privileged in that I never felt that poetry was something that men did, you know.
Yeah.
Until I did realise later that they weren't, they didn't appear very much in the anthologies, but as a child and growing up, I wasn't aware of that. And then I had great English teachers all along. I was just very, very lucky, you know. It's just extremely lucky. It's super English teachers, you know.
Yeah, so, I know. It sounds like it was very natural and organic. It was just there, and you didn't question it. It was just part of your life, which is the best way, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Other people talk about having a poetry beaten into them. It certainly wasn't my experience. I went to a two-teacher national school, and my father was a principal, and he loved poetry, so he used to, love daffodils and the usual little ones we learnt, the little roads of Breffni, and he's gone on the mountain, he's lost to the forest like a summer lost. Oh, I've lost it now. When our need was a sorest, like a summer dried fountain when our need was a sorest. So yeah. And
it sounds like your childhood was idyllic. It sounds like it was really
idyllic.
lovely.
It was reasonably happy, like most people's, but certainly poetry was important, you know. It was never...
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And then your poetry comes back time and time again to uncover what has been lost. And I love that about your poetry. There's kind of an imaginative compulsion to celebrate not just the things that endure and change as they survive, but also I think your poetry is celebrating the people who made these beautiful things, like the Vogel herd horse that graces the cover of the collection. It's very distinctive. But I love also a poem like Patched Kayak from your collection, the 1997 collection, The Parchment Boat, where you'd seen a kayak in the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And you said, who made the parchment boat? Who bent and bound ribs of drifted wood to a long, clean frame? Or in Crannog, that when you refer to the early burials, where there's weapons, but there's also jewellery and there's personal things that have been found together. And you say in that poem, we don't know what beads or blades are held in the bog lake's wet amber. Beautiful words, Moya. So where does this interest of yours in lost, beautiful things that somehow have managed to endure come from?
Well, I've always been interested in archaeology. I was just thinking about that this morning. You know, they're talking about the zoo is opening up again after
that's right.
After being closed for so long. And when we were children, for a few summers, we swapped houses with cousins in Dublin. And one of our outings, when we went to the zoo, but one that was almost as important was we went to the museum. And as a small girl, she was fascinated with the gold and kings and queens and princesses. So I was very interested in archaeology since then. But I suppose I'm fascinated by what we share with the people who lived quite a long time ago, and the centrality of art to those people absolutely fascinates me. When I came across an article by John Berger a number of years ago, talking about the Chauvet Caves and saying, you know, that we don't draw any better now than we did then. This really fascinated me, as had the beautifully worked gold objects in the museum when I was a child. There was also a book on the shelves at home, P.W. Joyce's Social History of Ancient Ireland, which I used to pore over. But I'm fascinated by the fact that long before we had literacy, I mean, literacy is 4,000 or 5,000 years old, people were making beautiful, beautiful art. And it seems to me that it's not art, you know, in the sense of something belonging to an elite. It's something which is absolutely central to our humanity. And perhaps one of the things that makes us human, because it seems to me people have always, they've gathered around things which give them pleasure, whether it's music. It's one of the things that brings us together. pleasure and meaning. And I think that's what art, whether it's song or visual art, it gives us pleasure and it gives meaning to our lives. And it's maybe it was one of the things, I don't know, which allowed people to move out of their immediate kinship groups into a larger community. Certainly we know as writers that, that there are little communities that have formed. Certainly it's been very important to me in my life, where poetry has brought me together with people. Mm-hmm. And I think people have always, in the way people come together around sport, people always come together around art. So that interests me a lot.
And it's interesting that you use the word pleasure there as well, because I know that you take great pleasure out of the outdoors. You love nature, you love hill walking. I've heard you say that you're happiest when you're on a mountain. I know you love the sea in your poem, or you say the sea is immense and unfathomable, that the oar that pulls against the wave and with the wave is everything. And you grew up in Donegal. I spent my childhood summers up in Donegal. It's a place I love very much as well. And I know that in your 20s and 30s, you spent time out in Inisheer, the smallest of the Aran Islands on the west coast. Yeah. And you're now living in Shankill. So the sea, nature, hill walking, how has it affected your poetry, Moya?
Well, how can I put it? It's everything. It's nearly everything. It's everything. Really, I don't know. It's just I just love the exhilaration of walking by the sea. I mean, I try to go down every morning, and we're kind of limited in where we can walk in the hills nearby. But we have, with Brayhead, with Killiney Hill, with the Scalp during this confinement, and it's just been a delight. I'll talk a little bit more about that actually when I'm talking about Nan Shepherd, because she puts it so much better than I do. But I was amazed, I was a student in the 70s in Dublin, and when I started to write poetry towards the end of the 70s, the last thing I expected to write about was landscape. I do remember though, the first, the way people have touchstone moments, and I remember when there was a mountain opposite the house where we lived, Muckish Mountain, and I was looking at it all my childhood, and we eventually persuaded my father, myself and my sister, to bring us. People didn't do much hill walking, and I remember we were coming down, and my father was about maybe 50 at the time, and we were 10 and 8. And I remember coming down, we weren't making much, we were moving slowly, and it was sort of dusk, and I remember coming down and seeing this beautiful little silver lake at the bottom of the mountain. And I'd been brought up in a tourist area where people were all saying, look at the view, isn't that a lovely view? We'll put a parking space there, there's a great view. And it meant zero to a child, absolute zero. But the whole world was brown except for this little silver lake, and then the silver sea out beyond it, and Torrey Island out beyond it. And it was a physical sensation. It still sends shivers up my back when I think of it. And I said, that's what people mean when they say something's beautiful. And we were out the other day, we walked our first day allowed to meet up with friends for a walk. We walked around Loch Bray, and again, two beautiful little Corrie lakes, and just the exhilaration of it. I don't know what our affinity with these places is, but it's primal,
Yeah, and I remember that primal thing when we were driving up from Dublin as kids, and we'd see Errigal, and we just feel, it's just, as a child, that visceral sensation. And also what you're describing is also a very kind of visual thing, and I think visual energy is very important in poetry as well, and you can feel it all the way through in this book of yours, Moya, and in your poems. And then, so we've talked about nature and we've talked about art, and now we're moving on to words, because words come into your poems so much, the importance of them. You grew up with Irish as your first language. I know you love Spanish. You've been studying it for years. I'm thinking of poems like Timbre, when you say, a word does not head out alone. It is carried about the way, something essential, a blade, say, or a bowl is brought from here to there when the work is done. And in Tholpin, a poem I love as well, you speak of one word enduring. So I'm just wondering, do you believe that words will endure, but also transform themselves to suit the changing world that they're a part of?
They do. And in Tholpin, I was thinking, well, in Timbre, when you're educated, certainly in our generation, my generation, I should say, you're educated into abstraction, which is great because you need to learn to abstract to control your life. But then once you start to write, and I always say this to students, you kind of have to roll that back a bit and get back into the more basic onomatopoeic language, which speaks to your blood as well as to your head, really. And so I was thinking of that in timbre, just a wonderfully onomatopoeic word, and soul pin as well. And it probably didn't communicate itself very well. It was a word which my mother used to use. She couldn't soul the noise we were making. It's a northern word, and it's a word. I was thinking of the two communities in the north. One of the things that they have in common is their language, the shared. And I was thinking of that, and how particular words like a soul pin. They're medieval words, or perhaps even earlier, belong to sort of pre-medieval, and they endure in crafts. And somebody was talking about a little thing in the context of this one, a little thing called a fid, which is used where you need something very precise, you'll use it. And also in that connection with that particular poem, my friend Anya Niconelli in Ishir was one time showing me how a currach was made, and she showed me the little soul pin, the little piece of oak which held the oar onto which you put into the side of the boat to hold the oar on. And she said, this is the most important part of the boat. And I thought that was very interesting. It's called what's it called in Irish? It'll come back to me. But she said, this is the most important part of the boat. And I was thinking that endurance as being important, and the thing that held, the language holding two communities together.
It's a really interesting idea. And Moya, your collected poems, it's out now. So I'm just wondering, what's next? I spoke to you recently and you said, I'm going to go on and on. There's going to be loads more books. But have you got new projects you're working on, or things that are exciting you? Because, I suppose when a big collection like this comes out, I don't know if you just sit there and go, well, that's that, or are you moving onwards to other things?
I've never had a central theme for a book. I've just put one poem on top of another, and at a certain stage you say, could that possibly be a collection? Yeah. And really, I feel quite the same as this. I have a handful of poems. You say, will that ever amount to anything? So no, I'm just writing another poem and another poem, and so it's very dull, but eventually it makes a book.
Yeah, I like that idea of a handful of poems, Moya. So your collected is a handful of poems, but a very fine handful as well. So I suppose that is the way, isn't it? Poems will come and they just build and build and build, and then suddenly you have a book, and a beautiful book, Moya. So congratulations. Now, I know that a place you love to go and work in is the National Library on Kildare Street here in Dublin. And you have a beautiful poem set there that you'd like to read for us, and it's called Starry, Starry Night in the National Library.
Sure. This is just an atypical moment in our beautiful, beautiful library. I was introduced to it by a boyfriend when I was a student, and I've loved it since. I tell the students who come in for the poetry aloud, this place belongs to you. Don't forget it. It belongs to you. Starry, Starry Night in the National Library. Vincent, you would have loved it, as Don McLean's song poured out of the bottom left-hand corner of the reading room of the Irish National Library, loudly enough for all 23 readers, drowsy browsers, graduate students, academics on sabbatical, to lift and turn startled heads, seabirds grazing a salt marsh. He sang for a whole yellow minute, maybe two, while readers continued to shift and turn around, not quite upset that their silence had been stolen. From her curved counter, a librarian scanned the desks, and a brown-jacketed, middle-aged man tiptoed from the catalogue section and gently closed the lid of a Mac Air, and a long, slow sigh came from all 44 cherubs who had been swinging their plump garlands high on the green library wall since your time. And I was blown back to a bedsit on South Circular Road, where, 40 years ago, I blue-tacked the poster of your blue and yellow field of stars at the head of my single bed, not finding it strange that the stars should swirl like small suns in the pit of night, not knowing it was painted a year before you took your own aching, luminous life. And you, not knowing, as you fought your darkness and frenziedly harvested the light of stars and sickle moon, how it would be poured into a song, how your brush would flood a library across the sea a century later with golden, starry light.
Oh, Moya, thank you. That was so exultant. And I loved as well that you mentioned the South Circular Road Seeing as Books for Breakfast is based here. So there's a good connection there as well. I love the National Library, and it's great that you go there.
And what a wonderful
would you go there a lot,
treasure it
Moya? I mean, if times were normal, would you be in there a lot?
I try to get in once a week. When I lived, when I moved back to Dublin a few years ago, I was living near you off South Circular Road. I used to try to go in most days, but I try to get in once a week, and it's a wonderful treat. And try not to bring the computer so that I'm not distracted by emails or all of the other things.
Like that.
It's a very distracted age we live in.
It's true. So anyway, that was Moya Cannon reading her poem Starry, Starry Night in the National Gallery from her collected poems published by Carcanet Press 2021. And Moya, we're now gearing up for the Toaster Challenge and really looking forward to hearing you talk about a book that you really like for 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be exactly 3 minutes, but we're hoping the toast won't burn. And Peter's got the toaster ready, haven't you, Peter?
Got it all ready. And I count you in. 1, 2, 3. Off you go, Moya.
Good luck, Moya.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Nan Shepherd's book, The Living Mountain, and this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's been described in The Guardian as the finest book ever written on nature and landscape in Britain, and the only book that I can compare to is Tim Robinson's Stones of Iron. It's a really short book, though, just 12 chapters. It's an introduction by Robert Macfarlane. He said he was given it by a friend in 2003 and he was changed after reading it. Claims to have read it 12 times, and there's an afterword by Janet Winterson. It's an evocation of the Cairngorm Mountains in the north of Scotland, and it's an act of total attention. For instance, in her chapter on air and light, she writes about shadows on the mountain. She says, even the delicate fringe inside the small cup of the field gentian throws its shadow on the petals and enhances its beauty. And further down on the same page, she writes about the air being part of the mountain. And I'm going to quote because I couldn't do her justice at all. She said, that the air is part of the mountain, she said, because the mountains are brown for the most part in themselves. But as soon as we see them clothed in air, the hills become blue. Every shade of blue, from opalescent milky white to indigo, is there. They're most opulently blue when there's rain in the air. And then the gullies are violet. Gentian and delphinium hues with fire in them lurk in the folds. It's really a multifaceted love story between a person and a place. And she says as much herself in the introduction, which she wrote in 1977 at the age of 84. And she adds, but love pursued with fervour is one of the roads to knowledge. And this book, it's full of information as well. She said when she was young, she was prone to lust for the tang of heights, but now she goes into the mountain just aimlessly, just to be with the mountain as a friend. She's a remarkable woman. She was born in Aberdeen in 1893, and she died in 1891. Sorry, she was born in 1893 and died in 1981, not very good with numbers. And she was a poet and novelist and landscape writer, and she taught English in the Aberdeen College of Education. She wrote this book during World War II and finished it in 1944, but it wasn't published for 30 years. She showed it to her friend Neil Gunn, who loved it, but said that she might find it hard to find a publisher, and warned her away from Faber, who she said was in a mess, and said that it might interest hill and country lovers. So she sent it off to one publisher who rejected it, and it lay there for 30 years. She's, as evident from the chapter headings, the plateau, water, frost and snow, air and light, it's kind of like an inside-out kaleidoscope. She writes of viewing the plateau from many different angles in every season, in every mood. And there's not an ounce of sentimentality here. She writes of the delights of the mountains, but also of its tragedies, including one terrible one where a group of children were caught in a blizzard. And in fact, Robert Macfarlane has described the Cairngorm Mountains as Scotland's Arctic. And she says, however often I walk in them, these hills hold astonishment for me. There's no getting accustomed to them. it strikes me that she proves Patrick Kavalin's theory that good writing is parochial, based on the idea that wonder lies not in some distant centre of the world, but in the world which lies around us, provided we're capable of going deeper and deeper into its mystery. It's been described as plain and as bracing as the water of a mountain stream, and it's absolutely full of magic. It's for armchair walkers or for serious walkers. Or for anybody who has any feeling for landscape, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's pure pleasure. And the English just sparkled when we were walking around Lochbray the other day. The granite had eroded and it was as if there were diamonds in the mud. And this book is just full of those diamonds. It's, I say, an absolute delight.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like an amazing book. I haven't read it, Moya, but I was reading.
You have a treat ahead of you.
Oh, I definitely want to read it now. I love that Robert McFarlane has read it so many times. And actually, I saw a quote from him, which I thought was really interesting. He said that when works are written about mountains by men, it's always about getting to the summit. But with Nan Shepherd, it's not. She just wants to aimlessly stroll around and take it in and explore. And all those, the beautiful descriptions there about the shadows. I think that's wonderful to write about shadows on a mountain. Oh, it just sounds like a magic book. And also the way you were describing it, her imaginative relationship with the wild world all around her on the mountains. I could see why, Moya, you absolutely love that book. Aren't you like Robert McFarlane? Have you read it many times?
I'm only on my third reading, I must confess, but it gets better and better and better.
Yeah.
It's just it's you can just keep mining it forever. It's the English is superb as well as her passion for the mountains and her knowledge as well of botany, etc., and archaeology. Very precise. Yeah, very like Tim Robinson. In that it's both. It's immensely precise and immensely poetic. But of course, there's no contradiction in that. I mean, good poetry is precise. It's just precise about different things.
Exactly. And it's amazing that it was untouched for 30 years and then finally gets published. That's brilliant.
Yeah, Neil Gunn wasn't encouraging her. But,
I know.
Now it was the end of the war. It was 1944, but still, I can't believe that such a jewel lie there. And it was Robert McFarlane who brought it to light, really, I think.
Yeah,
it was edited a very small edition in 1977 by Aberdeen University Press, I think.
Right.
And then somebody gave it to him and it's been republished in a beautiful edition.
Right, that's gorgeous. I'm definitely getting that. So that was wonderful to hear Moya Cannon talk about Nan Shepherd's masterpiece, The Living Mountain, published by Canongate. And details, as usual, will be on our Books for Breakfast website. But to end, we've had great chats there now, Moya. It was absolutely lovely to talk to you this morning. I'd love to hear one more poem by you, if that's okay. It's a short poem. It's actually the final poem in the collected. So it's in the new poem section. It's called Light is What Days Are Made Of. We would like to thank Moya Cannon. She really has been a distinguished guest on Books for Breakfast this morning. We're going to urge anyone listening to buy this beautiful collected poems and to treasure it. I mean, it's a gem of a collected poems published by Carcanet Press. And so here's Moya now. She's going to read Light is What Days Are Made Of. And thank you, Moya.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. This little poem was commissioned as part of the Shine a Light project last year by RTE. Anyway, I was walking by the beach in Shankill and the first line came to me. Light is what days are made of. It pulls a daffodil up out of dark earth, prompts the eagle and the stub-tailed wren to nest, and draws the humpback whale north with its song. Stones warm in the morning seashore know it. Our sun is so much older than them. Such tempests of grief it has scanned. Yet light, like love, eternally draws us on.
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And so
we'll be back again next Thursday morning. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.